don't wait for someone to give you permission. If you have a passion, I would say go for it, and for all the grants that I got so many rejections for all the, weird, crazy ideas that I thought up. There was a ton of rejection along the way, and that's just part of the process. Just let the love of what you're doing fuel it, and, it'll become a reality. Maybe not the reality you exactly imagine, but some version of it.
This is Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher, and I'm your host, Richard Wiese. Scratch the surface of an explorer and you'll find an adventure and a great story. This show is about their tales. This podcast is a proud supporter of the Explorers Club and the EC50 Initiative, 50 people changing the world that the world needs to know about. For more information, go to explorers.org. Welcome to Life's Tough, Explorers Are Tougher in association with the Explorers Club. I'm your host, Richard Wiese. Today, I'm honored to welcome Trevor Wallace, a master storyteller, an explorer, and a filmmaker whose work bridges art, science, and human culture. Trevor was raised by a strong, single mother who supported his curiosity from day one. That foundation of resilience and passion for story helped shape the way he connects with people, history, and place through his films, cultural projects, and public education work. I mean, I've seen so much of that, and it's just fantastic. And I'm more than just a casual observer of Trevor. I can tell you that all of this is done with nuance, humor, and a lot of heart. Welcome to the show, Trevor.
Thanks so much, Richard. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, Trevor, I was going to bring up something right off the top because I have heard, you and I have been friends for a while now, and I have heard you speak. And I often hear you glowingly speak about the influence of your mother. You've mentioned that your mother was a single mom. I don't know if I know the full story behind that.
Yeah, my mom definitely made a huge impact on me. She raised me and my brother on her own. She was born with a disability. She was actually born in New York, which is funny. Growing up in California and finding my way back to the city. But yeah, she was born with a disability that kind of plagued her throughout her life. But, she was born without a hip bone. Osteomyelitis was a bone-eating disease that ate away her hip bone. And they tried to operate, 24 times, and her body kept rejecting the hip replacement. So she finally was, and doctors had told her she'd never have kids. She was in chronic pain, but she was definitely stubborn and definitely determined to have a family. Had my brother and then me, and really defied the odds in so many ways. And moved as a hippie in the 1970s out to California, and she was doing sit-ins for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And really was like living her life. She wanted to be in nature. I think nature was really healing for her. Growing up in New York and later Chicago, she wanted to escape that concrete jungle. And she had a massive garden and she loved animals. We had like sometimes 8 or 9 dogs in her house. So it was a little bit of a zoo.
And what happened to your dad?
Yeah, my dad, we've connected later on. My dad had a little bit of legal troubles when I was a little kid. I always call him my uncle, but he's my dad's cousin. Victor Conti was known for the Balco scandal. I don't know if you're a baseball fan,
steroids.
But they were a little involved in that in that world.
Oh, I didn't realize that. So, okay. So did your dad, in my family, so my relatives are from Sicily. And when someone went to prison, they'd say he went to university. He was off to university. So was your dad off to university?
He was indeed. And no coincidence that my dad's side is actually Italian. So the name on my birth certificate was Joseph Conte. So Wallace is my mom's last name. Trevor used to be my middle name, and then was officially changed. So a little bit of a colorful childhood going in the 2 names, but it was a little bit confusing kind of living in the kind of 2 worlds of being like Joseph to my dad and Trevor to my mom. But my mom raised me, and along with a lot of help with from my brother, we were always, hiking in the hills of Marin County, mountain biking, finding these Miwok sites. It was a beautiful place to grow up, and I feel honestly super lucky.
It's really amazing. I think for a kid, it doesn't really matter. I mean, obviously, destitute poor is not good, but I think super rich is probably equally as bad. But I think when you're a kid, you just want your parent, right? You want your mom, you want your dad. You just want to know that you have people in your life that sort of believe in you.
Yeah, absolutely. And my mom, it was because of her disability, it was difficult for her to travel. She never even really finished high school. She went back, she ran away from home when she was really young. So she ended up getting her GED later, but education was first. I definitely took an interesting life path, but my brother ended up, going to Harvard Business School and being a successful entrepreneur. So from going from my mom, who didn't finish high school, to my brother, was impressive. And then, I wasn't so bad.
No, but Trevor, that's an amazing story. So what is it within your mother that she saw in you and your brother, or saw as your future? I mean, it's one thing saying, oh, it would be great if my son went to Harvard Business School or became a vice president of the Explorers Club and great filmmaker. What is it that you think your mom instilled in you guys, or the vision that she saw? She had to have a vision.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a mix of things. I think it was, my mom was always super creative. Even though she didn't really finish school on a traditional track, she was like a biological illustrator. So she loved, being in nature and observing from nature. She was very creative. And then she instilled a lot of compassion in us. I think that, dealing with her disability was really challenging, and fighting for a lot of her rights as a single mom, as a disabled person. She tried to instill that compassion in us. And, my brother started a women's health company. I don't think it was a coincidence. He wanted to help people. And, I have always thought exploration isn't about big feats. In a way, it's about understanding the world around us. And I think the best way to help and make a better world is to understand it better, is the first step. So I think that's always been some part of, what I want to do, and why I've also kind of delved into the education piece, is giving back, because, that was, my mom really put school ahead of everything else. And I wasn't a perfect student by any means, but I was definitely, the things I was passionate about, I just went all for it. And the teachers that, supported me, I think a lot of different history teachers, art teachers, science teachers who mentored me, I'm super grateful. And then later on, when I got a chance to teach, I kind of tried to do the same thing. The kids who might be acting out or struggle with different subjects, I would try to find what they were interested in and really like drive that passion, rather than focusing on, because everyone has subjects or topics they don't like or just don't resonate.
Our mission is to empower the next generation of explorers. If you like this podcast, please recommend it to a friend and have them join the expedition. So, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I guess you first came into my consciousness in, I believe, 2018. You were at the Explorers Club annual dinner. And for those of you who don't know, this is like a collection of the greatest explorers in the world. You and your partner, Gino Caspari, were the Young Explorers of the Year. That year, you were honored with Jeff Bezos, and I think, was it Jim Lovell, the other person, right?
Yeah, Captain Jim Lovell and Dr. Edith Witter. And yeah, it was an amazing group.
Yeah. So and I don't think I've ever told you this, but the one thing that always impressed me from day one is the level of compassion, because I think often, explorers, are often alpha individuals, and it's, hey, look at me. And I always got a feeling that you were willing to lend a hand to somebody who was trying to solve something, or you thought you could make it better. Do you think that compassion that you bring on, and it really is a difference maker, and I'd say if there was a superpower to you, Trevor, it might be your compassion.
Oh man, that's really sweet of you to say that, Richard. I mean, I think exploration really is a team. It's a team sport, in my opinion. And somebody who's on the storytelling side, it's just, sometimes, you think of, explorers with the huge egos, and it's all about, the person who's talking and saying their monologue and impressing a big room of people about their adventures. But also it's important the person who listens and, and who can help tell that story. And I think that was pretty much 10 years ago. I met Gino at the Explorers Club bar, and you get some real big personalities. And he's Swiss, so he's pretty like even keeled. And now having like been to Switzerland, meet his family, I understand he's actually like on the other end of the bell curve there. They see him as like, more showy than most. It's just much more subdued. And, he just started telling me a few things. And at that point, I had shot some films in college, and you walk into the club and the Friday frolics vibe around the bar. It's like, you want to let people know you've done a thing or two. But I was more interested in listening to him and what his PhD research was on this part of the world. It was just an edge of the map for me, and kind of challenged my understanding of how ancient civilizations and cultures develop. So I was just like, wow, I'd much rather listen to you. And
I know you're a good listener, but I have to tell you, my friend, you are a great storyteller. And I really want to tell the audience what happened a few weeks ago. So we were doing a memorial, a tribute for Jane Goodall. And the first person I guess, what was I, host? I don't even know what the term is when you're presiding over the event. I knew a lot of people would be intimidated to come up to the lectern and, sort of share a moment of remembrance about Jane Goodall, because you had Anna Rathman, who was the executive director of the Jane Goodall Institute, knew her very well. And then you had the next speaker was Morad Tabaz, who had been imprisoned wrongly in Iran for 6 years and had a correspondence with Jane Goodall. When he was released, he spent like 2 hours with her at the UN, just huddled alone, the two of them. And I thought to myself, okay, I know some people in the audience that I can just sort of say, hey, get up there. And I'm like, come on, Trevor, show some leadership qualities. Get up there and, just give a toast or something. And you launch into what I think was a really great story. So I'll let you tell it to the audience.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. You put me a little on the spot, but I'm glad you did, because Jane did make a huge difference in my life, even though we had a pretty brief encounter. But it was it was definitely memorable. It goes back to the point about, my mom always loved Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey. These were her heroes, these strong women, going out there doing the research. And I was really interested in wildlife and conservation when I was a young teenager. And some of my friends at the school I was going to, had been on vacation to these beautiful places, in sub-Saharan Africa. And I wanted to go. And she, obviously that wasn't in the cards for us, but she found this program, a Roots and Shoots program, which is Jane Goodall's foundation, that had kids be zoo camp counselors for the summer. And then after that, doing that volunteer work, we got to go to Tanzania for 2 weeks. So I was a zoo camp counselor. My counselor name was Rhino. And I enjoyed that summer a lot. Taking, I was young. I was, 13 turning 14, but taking around like little preschooler kids to see the warthogs and stuff. And it was always a good time. And what a dream. It was my first time leaving the country and was going to Tanzania. And it was, with a group of young people. And yeah, I mean, the minute I stepped foot in, in East Africa and got to see Ngorongoro Crater and, be able to go to this wildlife college. It was such an eye-opening experiences. We were with the Mara and with the Maasai warriors and the Bomas and the villages. And it was just like, wow, my whole worldview is just sort of blown up. And, I went there because of the wildlife, but the culture really grabbed me. And of course, we saw some really intense things as well. I remember visiting an orphanage that was all kids who had lost their parents from AIDS. And there were like 40 kids packed into this
that's
little room. And it just put everything in perspective for me, as a young kid. And, we dropped off some donations and supplies to the kids. And of course, it was meant to give us a perspective on the level of poverty there. But really what happened at the end of the trip, really what impacted me most, and I think everyone in our group, we were staying under Mount Kilimanjaro. We were right in the shadow of the mountain. And, in these sort of little hotel hostel with these bungalows surrounded by coffee plantation. And, sort of the last nights we were all, reminiscing about what an incredible trip it had been and, going through our photos and just not really wanting to leave. At least me. Late that night, I was hanging out in a friend's room and we heard some strange noises. And one of my friends said, "Oh, I think it was, maybe a door slam or something." And, I just remember there was, something weird. I had a weird sense. And, about half an hour later, we heard some shouting at the door. And one of my friends just opened the door and there were, four guys with guns and machetes and clubs rush in. And they pulled our guide, Charles, in. He was in his underwear, tied up, and he was bleeding from his shins. They had hit him with one of those Maasai clubs, which, they're it's a nasty thing. You don't want to get hit with one of those. And just they started yelling for money and cameras. They cut the telephone wire with one of the machetes. And it felt like everything was going in slow motion. And one of the folks in my group, she started arguing for a camera, kind of doing a little tug and war with this guy. And I just said, give him the stuff. He slapped her. And I had been sitting down on a bed and out of reaction, I just stood up and I got thrown back down on the bed and hit with this club in my ribs. And before I knew it, he was holding the gun against my head and they were, darting back and forth in Swahili, I guess, like deciding what they were going to do next. I kind of went into sort of fugue state. I was just like, wow, this is it. Fortunately, they seemed to decide that they needed to get out of there. They grabbed all the stuff they could and just ran out. We locked the door. We untied Charles, and it was, we were on the lookout. It was the middle of the night and, just adrenaline pumping. The police did end up showing up, but they were guys in jumpsuits with AK-47. So we thought they were like different robbers coming to get us.
God.
We opened up, and I remember the police chief was in this like pinstripe suit. It looked like out of a noir movie, but like so out of context for Tanzania. He was wearing this like fedora hat. And I was like, is this a dream right now? But he had me, I've always loved drawing. And so he had me draw all the faces of all of the robbers. I could remember their guns, a guy with the weird little sawed-off
That's amazing.
shotgun.
Do you still have those drawings?
I gave it to the police. Then the next morning brought me to a police station. I feel bad for the group guides actually, because they were like in their 20s and they had this harrowing experience too. But the police chief was like, "Oh, your guides can't come with you. You got to come on your own because they'll influence you." Because I guess they took these drawings and then they went out to the markets and they saw our stuff being sold even just the next morning in the markets. And they had caught some guys. And the police chief said, "Okay, you got to separate from your group leader." And it was kind of a seedy area. He brings me in the police station and there's this sort of dark corridor going down. And there's, guys in cells like trying to grab me. And the police chief is like hitting their arms away with a stick. I thought it was going to be like a two-way mirror situation, but it turned out it was just a dirt courtyard with 12 guys lined up, zip tied. And the police chief said, "Go walk in front of them and, look at each one of their faces and then walk behind them and then just point the one out to me." Yeah, I walked in front of them and saw one of the guys. And, it was a shocking realization. He was this young, desperate guy. And of course, I'm going on no sleep and kind of regret it to some extent. It's hard to blame myself, but I did point him out. Don't know what ended up happening to him, but it was a wake-up call. The guys, they had like taken our shoes and stuff. It was obviously a desperate poverty situation, and it really made me appreciate everything that I had back home. And it made me start to ask a lot of big questions about how the world works and what is fair and, how people get into these situations. Not that what they did was right, but it was definitely out of desperation.
Were you in Arusha? Where were you?
Yeah, we were in Arusha.
Okay. It's a small town at the foothills of Kilimanjaro, but the real kicker of the story really is now at the airport. You have your broken ribs, probably a little disheveled, and you're heading home.
Yeah, so they quickly transferred us to a YMCA, and then they were like, we're supposed to get flights out of Dar es Salaam, but they're like, we're going out of Kenya. So it's like, okay, we're gonna get all of us on a bus, and they're like, we're not stopping because crossing the border can be sketchy, and if you stop in some area, you never know what's going to happen. We roll up to Nairobi Airport, and we're all kind of in this fugue state. And we see none other than Jane Goodall riding her bike through the like open air terminal. And she kind of skids up and she said, I heard what happened to your group. I'm so sorry. I happened to be in Nairobi and I wanted to see you all off and make sure you're okay. And make sure, don't let this define your whole experience. And make sure you remember, this trip for what it was for you. And she gave each of us a hug. I remember mine was a little bit painful. And I remember her, looking me in the eye and saying, how brave our group was for getting through this experience and how much that meant to us. I was about to head into my freshman year of high school. I was all nervous about high school. And it just seemed like every problem in the world just sort of dissipated away. I had this whole just appreciation to be alive. Everything seemed larger than life and what possibilities, like how lucky I was. And
it seems like that is a slightly pivotal moment in your life because everybody perceives their first world problems as, oh my gosh, there was traffic, or I missed a bus, or I missed the train, and it was just horrible. It rained. And then when you start putting it into perspective, I mean, I've never had a gun at my head. I've been around guns or guns pointed around me, and it's not a comfortable feeling. To have someone break your ribs, again, not knowing to what the outcome is going to be. You're, I guess, 14 years old. What made you think that, wow, this is cool. I'd like to continue in this life?
Yeah, I mean, it really was just snowballed from there. I just felt like everything else, I had great experiences, but they were kind of like packaged for me. And this kind of busted that bubble. It was raw, this kind of raw experience of going to another place with all the good and the bad and the overcoming. I thought, wow, this is what an adventure. And just the next summer, I found a program to live in a Buddhist monastery in Thailand. And the next summer I was with monks and I was miserable at meditation, can barely sit cross-legged. I remember the monks were like pushing my legs down all the time. And then, the summer after that.
Hey, wait, what'd you learn from that experience? Because I always say you're the sum and total of your experience. So you went from the ultra death-defying adrenaline thing to sitting there examining your navel.
Yeah, it was definitely different than I expected, and it was a rural village on the border of Laos. And it was with my really good friend and his sister. It was a small group doing this sort of exchange program. And me and my friend lived in the monastery with the monks. And in Thailand, what kind of surprised me, I kind of had imagined these lifelong dedicated monks, very sacred, very composed. But in Thailand, it's common for young men to become a monk for like 6 to 8 months. So I was like a little shocked when I saw one of the monks was like playing FIFA on his phone and smoking cigarettes. I was like, wait, this isn't the monks that I like imagined. And our quarters were right next to the crematorium. So we would kind of like smell the burnt bodies from time to time. And we were trying to meditate hours a day. And just being a teenager, that was really tough for me. There's so many funny moments. The abbot himself, a dedicated lifelong monk, one day pulled out this guitar and started playing Black Sabbath songs. You can't make this
That's
stuff
surreal.
up. And it was just like, it was this really, really interesting experience as a teenager. His lyrics, I don't think like most of the words were, but the sound, you could tell it was like he was playing Crazy Train, and it was like pretty hilarious. But also it made me reframe a lot of the romanticized visions that I had of how Buddhism, it's in every different culture and every different country, it means something different. It means something different to every person. And I definitely, learned a lot of value in meditation. It definitely gave me a lot of time to think. And then we were teaching English in these schools. And so, just spending time with like young kids on the other side of the earth and figuring what we had in common and what was different. It was definitely another mind-opening experience.
Did you have any other trips in high school?
Yeah. The following summer, me and my friend, actually a friend who happens to live not too far from me in Brooklyn now, he'd grown up on a catamaran in the South Pacific. Like he was one of those boat families from the time he was 7 to 12. He was on a boat and had spent time in Fiji, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, a year in New Zealand. And we told his parents that we were going to visit one of his boat friends from the time when he was sailing. And I had met him in high school, like freshman year. I thought, oh my God, this kid, he's awesome. He was not that far off of the boat, so he's pretty bushed and, integrating into normal high school society. He was definitely taking it step by step, but I thought, wow, he's got some incredible stories. And by our junior year, he said, let's go back to one of these places where I spent time as a kid. And we scraped some money together just to buy our plane tickets. And then we hitchhiked the whole length of New Zealand. We told our parents that we were just going to stay with his friends in Kerikeri in the north. But we spent like a couple of days with them. And then we just started hitchhiking for a solid month.
You may very well have the greatest high school story for a college application that I've ever heard. No, because I know people where I live in Connecticut, they spend a lot of money to send their kids on cool sounding trips so they can write about it on their college application. But I don't think any of them would sign up for getting a gun to their head or, sitting there next to a crematorium in playing Black Sabbath with monks in Thailand. Now, you're a little separated. So if you had a conversation with your high school Trevor, what piece of advice would you give him now?
I hate to say it. I wish I had written down more. I wish I had captured it more. I mean, that was sort of the next chapter as I started to like really document everything. And I wanted to share these stories and what I learned and share these other cultures around the world. I remember in New Zealand, I kept like a journal of everybody who picked us up while we were hitchhiking. And tragically, I lost that journal. And it's just like, that's a double-edged sword because now, with like your kids, everything in their lives is documented, but it's always that filter. Like in some ways, I'm kind of glad as a teenager, I was just, raw out there. I mean, I didn't have a smartphone in New Zealand. I was 17. My friend I was hitchhiking with was 16 and we were on like the side of the road, just like, with not like basically no money. A lot of like moms would pick us up because they were worried about us. Like, especially my friend Dana, he looked like 12, like he was 16, but he was like we were just going and not for a vlog or a YouTube channel. Like we were just going for the raw experience. And sometimes the camera and sometimes that can create like a barrier from the experience. But I do wish there was some part of me that had just captured a little bit more of those journeys.
You're painting a very romantic version of life on the road. Like if I'm a kid listening to this, I'm like, I'm all in. Or maybe not every kid, at least, if I were talking to the 14 or 15-year-old me. But I mean, there's got to be some hard truths about exploration too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of just downtime. It depends. There's some projects that you're really going nonstop, but fast forward to years later in Siberia with Gino, I looked at that same mountain ridge and scraping through the mud for months. I mean, and what I define as exploration is not, just about planting a flag or making it to a peak. It's about the knowledge you can get. And sometimes getting that knowledge is slow. And I can't tell you how many broken pieces of pottery and random animal bones I found before. Like it took 7 years to go back finally last year. Kind of a crazy story going back to Russia last year, but yeah, them finding the earliest animal style Scythian artifacts ever found, finding these incredible things.
No. You're just throwing out terms that people will not, a Scythian, just to sort of put it in perspective, predates the Mongols who were in there, Attila the Hun and all that. It predates it by 3,000 years, earliest horse riders.
Yeah. So yeah, they were the prototype of the horseback warrior nomad. So like coming out of the Bronze Age into the Iron Age, yeah, like almost 3,000 years ago, they figured out, okay, we're fighting against the Chinese and the Persians and the Greeks, and it works pretty well to ride fast on horseback and have these powerful composite bows. And yeah, they were able to amass a cultural sphere that stretched thousands of miles in the steppe.
Wait, so now just again, just to throw a little color in this story, I don't know if this is the right location, but around, I'm going to say 2019 or 20, we get a call from Russia saying that your friend Gino was in jail. And I thought it was a scam. I thought it was, somebody trying to pull the wool over eyes. So were you in jail with him, and why was he in jail?
Yeah, so Gino had left earlier. I was
Just to
not.
put it in everybody's head, this is Gino Caspari, the Swiss guy who we brought up earlier in the podcast. He's your sort of partner, Dr. Gino.
Yeah, so Gino was leading this archaeological expedition with his Russian co-leads. We had spent like 5 months out in the field, and we were taking a break because we were going to go back that like October, November, because we hadn't finished. We had found these like 100 burials, like all these skeletons we didn't expect to find. So the campaign was stretching out. It was never our plan to go into the Siberian winter, which November very much feels like winter when you're in Siberia. But Gino was going back to Switzerland, and I was staying on the site for a bit longer. And yeah, I get this quick text message from Gino that's like, contact as many people as you can. I'm in Sheremetyevo in the airport. They're putting me in jail. There's some problem with my visa. And yeah, before I know it, like I'm trying to get back in contact with Gino. He's completely cut off. And yeah, I remember texting you, texting Will Roseman, texting some of our donors and folks that ended up helping us get Gino out of jail, which yeah, is tough. Like, Gino's got the criminal record in Russia, and unfortunately last year, me too. So,
It's hard to keep up with some of your stories because they're intertwined with other people. But didn't you break some bones in Switzerland then more recently?
Yeah, I was actually working on a project with Gino, and we're looking for this shipwreck in the North Sea, a project supported by the Impact Grants program, an incredible project. And we had just done a multi-beam sonar survey looking for this shipwreck that has amazing cargo of Egyptian antiquities. And it was on the tail end. We had gotten the sonar data. We were back in Switzerland because we were doing that survey in northern Germany. And we were talking with some Swiss police divers because we were planning a dive mission in this river with terrible visibility. So they were giving us tips on how to dive in low vis and cold water. And the meeting had gone late. Maybe it was 9 or 10. And I was staying in a little village outside of Bern with Gino's brother. And yeah, just was riding Gino's bear bike on this kind of dark path. And I see something kind of skitter out onto the path. And I just sort of try to avoid it and went on some ice and just like went over the handlebars. And I knew immediately, I was like, oh, okay. Growing up in California, my brother raced downhill mountain biking. I grew up mountain biking, and I just sort of like took it on my shoulder, but it felt weird. I knew it felt weird immediately. And I felt my shoulder, and like, I just felt my collarbone. It just was like popping up in a really weird way. And I was like, oh man, I broke my collarbone. Call Gino, I'm kind of in this ditch. And Gino's like, oh man, an ambulance can't really make it to this weird little path. We got to walk you to the hospital. So I'm like, limping along, like it's pretty painful. But Gino's like, I know there's actually a hospital like maybe 15 minutes away. We get to this hospital, and they're like some crazy amount of money just to see me because it's a private hospital. I end up like walking to another one. I'm like, dang, this is really tough. I get some x-rays, and it turns out I didn't break my collarbone. I tore my bicep quite badly. And then I tore my AC joint, which is sort of like what connects a lot of stuff up there. And they were like, if you don't get the surgery in 2 weeks, you're going to have to get tended grafts from your leg, probably going to have to get 3 surgeries, and you're never going to raise your arm above your head, probably. And I was just like, wow, I did not expect that. I was so out of left
but
field.
no one ever does.
It was just like, I had how many bumps and bruises I had, and not really any like tough injuries, but it was really a moment where the whole Explorers Club community just rallied behind me, because I was just like, okay, my travel insurance had run out because I had extended my trip and I just didn't know what to do. And someone posted in the task force, a thread of Explorers Club members helping, people who
I
are
remember
in
this.
bad
I
situations.
remember this very well. But I have to tell you, Trevor, because, and I'm being completely honest, I'm not flattering you, because you are very popular and people literally believe that if they were ever in danger or had a problem, you would be the first one to help. For me, the idea that you have a community that really cares about you is great, right? It's a good feeling. You must feel like you have friends around the world.
That's what the club is to me. It's not about excluding other people, but we're this kind of band of misfits who have chosen a different life path. And as a result, we get into situations where we need help. So anytime that another explorer needs help, is just, I was really touched by it. And just all the people who reached out to see if I was doing okay, and people giving me advice, orthopedic surgeons. Yeah, I mean, really, there was a ton of folks in Europe trying to help me get my surgery date. Because even when it was I had figured out a way to get this surgery, the date kept getting pushed. All these folks, hundreds of people who literally reached out to me, it was really, really touched me. And
you have an amazing life. So what have I learned today? I've learned it's good to be Trevor Wallace. And so tell me, best and worst things. Start with the worst thing about being an explorer, and then you can tell me the best.
Yeah, worst thing about being an explorer, I think it's the folks you leave behind. The pets, the loved ones. It can be hard. It can be hard when the months on end and the people that you miss. And I think the best thing is just the perspective it gives. I think sometimes we're so caught up in the narrow view of, what's going on and, on our phone or whatever, we're caught up on that. And being able to explore makes you feel like you're part of something so much bigger. It puts all of your own things you're on your mind or preoccupied about in perspective. And, being a small thread in a larger web is an amazing feeling, in my opinion.
I'm amazed. As I said, you did not disappoint with your story. So, now you're sort of bridging the gap from the young explorer to the middle-aged explorer. What's the last piece of advice you would give to somebody? Talk to that high school or college kid who's interested in it. What's the best advice that you've been given?
I would say, don't wait for someone to give you permission. If you have a passion, I would say go for it, and for all the grants that I got so many rejections. For all the, weird, crazy ideas that I thought up, there was a ton of rejection along the way. And that's just part of the process. Just let the love of what you're doing fuel it, and, it'll become a reality. Maybe not the reality you exactly imagine, but some version of it.
Yeah, life never really goes as you think it will. It's just always different good, different bad, but it's always different. Trevor, thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
Likewise. And I just was super honored to be on the podcast, and always great to talk to you, a master storyteller, an amazing leader of our organization. So it's just, it's been great to be your friend and great to work with you all these years.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed our podcast. Now we have a little favor to ask. We'd really appreciate your support, so make sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss another episode. See you out on the trail.